Sorry.
And we are live. Welcome to Deal Flow Live. I'm one of your hosts, Brody Vinson.
I'm your other host, Ryan Santo.
And on this show, whether you're new or returning, just to tell you a little bit about what we do here, we look into businesses that are currently listed for sale online. These are businesses that if you went online, you could currently make an offer to buy. We just talk a little bit about what the deal looks like in our eyes, what our opinion of it is, and whether or not it's one that we would be interested in entertaining. And we give our opinion on, the asking price, whether it's fairly priced, whether it's one that sounds like it would be a good acquisition just overall, and also what types of people this specific business might appeal to. And today we actually have a special guest on, Bill Rogers. Bill, thank you so much for being on.
Appreciate it. Appreciate the opportunity. Looking forward to a great conversation.
Now,
awesome. And go ahead, Ryan.
No, I'm just so excited, because Bill is a particularly incredible person that we met at a Roland Frazier event. He actually works very closely with Roland on a lot of things and the deals when we talk about his book all the time on here. So it's sort of like a oh man, we're really in the big time now. Bill's coming on our show. So obviously I want to get to the deals at some point, but I wanted to kind of show everybody why we love talking to Bill and why he's been so prolific in the area. So Bill, you didn't start out as like an M&A guy. You actually got your start independently in the corporate America. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I did. I actually refer to myself as a recovering corporate executive. So I spent the majority of my career in corporate America as a sales executive. The past 18 plus years as a chief revenue officer for a security technology company based out of Austin, and finally got a point to my career that I was at this inflection point of what's next. Had been working on M&A. My wife and I on the side had been part of the Epic Network and Roland Frazier and been working on that on the side. And deals have started flowing in and things have started turning over that I was actually at this crossroads. And at the beginning of this year, took the leap and really went into focus at M&A full time and devote all of my energy out in it. And really, it's enabled me to go in and really open up a whole new world, taking my background and experience in sales, in management, and operations, and really finding companies that when you take a look at the companies out there, those are the three areas that they're struggling with at the most, and taking a look at those opportunities that have a strong foundation and how you can bring in that expertise and build and grow it.
That's awesome. It's really kind of incredible how you transitioned, how you were simultaneously working as an executive and also fielding deals with you and your wife. That's crazy. The fact that you were just balancing both at the same time, no less. And now, one thing we like to talk about on this show is that you don't always have to go for deals in your niche. And I know you came from a technology background. And were you only fielding technology companies when they were coming to you, or were you looking at a wide variety of different industries?
I'm always looking for a wide variety of industries, and I've got my specialties. Technology is a specialty. Home services, coaching and mentoring programs, things like that are my specialty. But I'm all about partnerships, and I'm always looking for one of the reasons why we're part of the Epic Network is you've got over 2,000 different other investors that are part of this network, always looking for opportunities to partner with. If you take a look at all of the deals, which Deanna and I are up to 6, getting ready to be 7 companies that we either wholly own outright, or we've got CFE deals with, or we're partnered in. The vast majority of them are with a partner. I always prefer to go into an opportunity with a partner because it opens up, it casts a wider net in the type of deals you can go after and bring in specialty niches. Perfect example, we're looking at a deal for a race car engine manufacturing company in Texas. I know nothing about automotive. I know nothing about race car engines, but I know sales, I know operations. Deanna knows marketing. So we brought in a partner that has expertise and background in the automotive space, which enables us to go into this opportunity that we would have normally passed up.
Wow. That's really smart stuff. And I'd like to call out a couple things here based on what you've said. The first one is just the relatability of your story, I think is really cool because like Ryan said, and like you said, it's not like you went to school for exactly this and have just been on this exact M&A trajectory your whole life. You built all these skills that then in turn allowed you to take them and put them into your own context that you wanted to for M&A. And I think for anyone tuning in, listening, watching, anything like that, you have skills that you've been building up, whatever your career is, and you could probably leverage those in the world of M&A in running some kind of company that you have some unfair advantage in. The other thing I would love to key in on is the CFE deals, because this is a unique point.
Brody, I think your mic might have cut out. I can't hear you. Bill, can you hear him?
How about now?
There we go. We're back.
Sorry about that, ladies and gentlemen. So the other thing I wanted to key in on is this concept of CFE that you were talking about, Bill. I think this is a really interesting thing that we don't talk about as often on this show, but would you mind going into what that concept is, what CFE stands for, what it means, and how you've seen it play out?
Exactly. Say what, there's so many opportunities out there there's actually a lot more opportunities for consulting for equity deals than there are for M&A deals for you to grow. And actually a CFE deal can turn into an acquisition deal. And I'll talk about that in a second. But, it's this approach of going in and finding a company, that's ultimately looking to sell and having a conversation with that seller. Say the seller's not, ready to exit, or they're not, they're not, they don't have one foot out the door, and you can talk them into staying in the business and being part of the business and growing the valuation in the business. Say he's looking to sell the business for $1 million, and you approach the owner and you see the opportunity and the foundation in the business this can ultimately turn into a way to acquire a business. You go in and you talk to them about unlocking the hidden value within that business, and you secure an ownership stake in the business. So a common CFE opportunity is a 10-10-10, to where you have a 10% equity in the business, but then you also have a 10 or 10. In other words, you take out $10,000 a month or 10% of net profits, whichever is greater. So when the company does go, if they do sell at some point in time and you're not the person buying it, you can still get 10% equity in the business. So you have that security in the ownership, but you're able to build and grow the business. And what the benefit to the owner is that whereas this owner may have been looking to exit in 2 or 3 years, you can walk them through by bringing in your experience and your background and bringing in maybe another partner and their experience and background into the equation, can help grow the business from where they're struggling at today, get a higher valuation. So whether you all exit the business, you're able to increase what you're taking home. So that's the strategy around CFE. And a perfect opportunity that my wife and I had is we had a company that teaches people how to be stay-at-home bookkeepers. And it was approached to us as a M&A opportunity. The owner was burnt out, was looking to exit the business. And so we had a conversation with her and talked her into an opportunity to do a CFE deal, so that we would go in and I would focus on sales and operations. My wife would focus on marketing, and go in and see if we can lift up and build up the business and really prove to the owner that what we could do with the business. That was 5 months ago. Now it's turned into a full M&A opportunity that we're going to acquire the business. By the way, with no money out of pocket, we're going to acquire this business because of what the owner sees. The owner's going to stay and take a 50% stake in the business. We're going to take a 50% stake in the business. And she sees where the both of us and our experience and background can actually grow and build this, so that when we all sell the business 3 years from now, we're going to be able to get a 3, 4, 5x multiplier than what she was originally wanting.
I love that so much. And it's just a testament to how important it is to focus on building skill sets in sales, marketing, and operations. Because it sounds like really what you found is an opportunity where whoever started this company maybe got to the point where they didn't feel like they had the skills to take it where they wanted it to go. And you and your wife were able to fill that gap and take it to where she wants it to go. And in many cases, I've seen this before too. I helped someone sell their business last year who on September 1st of this year, it had officially been 1 year since he sold. He sold 70% of his business. And just a year later, his remaining 30% was worth more than the original 70% that he sold. It was just because he found someone very strong in sales and operations. So one thing I would love to kind of double click on there is, what does a conversation like that look like? How do you even broach that topic? How do you know when it's right to broach that topic if you have an opportunity?
So it's getting in early on, and as I said earlier, out of all of the CFE opportunities that I've either been involved in or have had personally, the majority of them have started out as a seller wanting to exit the business. And it's going through it and really breaking down. I actually have a list of like 30 questions that I ask the seller to really get an understanding and uncovering what their struggles are, what their strengths are. Why are they wanting to exit? Are they wanting to exit because they're wanting to retire? Are they wanting to exit because they're burnt out and frustrated? The burnt out and frustrated one is a great one, because that means that the company's got a core solid foundation. They're just looking for a relief pitcher. They're looking for someone to come in and help them to share the burden of the company, to grow and build it, so that you remain a perfect example with this bookkeeping company, academy company. The founder, she's going to remain as the founder and visionary role of the company, while we actively get in. And one of our criteria is always that there's a strong operator left in place. So we've got a strong operator that's there, and to really grow it and build it. So going through this list of questions that we've put together, that Deanna, my wife, and I have put together, it really helps walk the owner through that. Really, unless you need to pay off a debt now and you need cash in your pocket now, we can walk through how we can continue to both take, we can take out of the company as we grow and build the company. And then as we build the company and solve for some of the struggles that you have right now, if it comes into having a solid sales team or having a strong marketing presence or whatever those obstacles are, then we can both, we can all exit the business. So what I always ask the seller is, what is your biggest struggle to growth right now? And if you had a magic wand, what would your 3 biggest growth opportunities be? And then I take those 4 things and put it into, this is how we can help you achieve that, and achieve that business that you always wanted to build that didn't have the talent or the resources or the time to do. And then they start buying back into the business, so to speak, and buying back into the long-term plan. So there's a lot of opportunities out there. And then as you grow, you can turn it into a full M&A opportunity, or that you all exit the business with making more in the long run.
This is really, really good stuff. And I think for anyone watching or listening, I think a lot of the people that tune into this show are people that would like to buy a business for the first time in the future. And what I love about this so much is it shows how diverse the spectrum of buying a business is. Most people, when I mention buying a business, they're like, well, how would I do that? I don't have millions of dollars just laying around that I could buy a business with. As we know, going through this show, there are businesses of all different shapes and sizes, but deal structures can vary drastically as well, like Bill's hinting at here. You can get into one before the sale even happens and help the sale happen if you educate yourself around this. What are the 2 or 3 skills, would you say, Bill, that took you from feeling like, I'm looking at this M&A thing, I like the sound of it, I think it could be right for me, I think it could be interesting, aside from the sales, operations, and marketing knowledge that the 2 of you came in with, what are the 2 or 3 either skills or knowledge points that you would say made you feel like you were ready to take that jump for someone who might be listening and watching and considering that jump for themselves?
The one thing I encourage you, because as I said, I'm a recovering corporate executive, and I encourage you to find a good network. Perfect example, as Brody and Ryan both spoke of, my wife and I are both part of Epic Network. It's a group of like-minded investors that focuses on there's over 200 ways for you to go out and acquire a business with no money out of pocket. And so first and foremost, I encourage you to find a good mentor, someone that helped guide you. I had a couple of good mentors that helped guide me through that, through initial deal reviews, things like that. And then, perfect example, one of the, as I said earlier, my wife and I, we put together an acquisition criteria so that we hold ourselves accountable. Anybody that's gone on an M&A journey, it's like going into a candy store. And I want that opportunity. I want that opportunity. So we put together our red lines in the sand and saying a company's got to have, an EBITDA of greater than $1 million. It's got to have at least been in business for 3+ years. An operator has to be staying in place upon the owner's exit. So we put together an acquisition criteria. And as we're going through looking at opportunities, we hold ourselves accountable that if it doesn't meet that acquisition criteria, then we pass and we open it on, we put it out to the network and we let someone else take a look at it. But because some may be looking at something that's got an SDE of $500,000 or less or something like that. So, setting out that acquisition criteria, having a good set of mentors in place that you go through, and then just start diving in. Right, I've screwed up more deals going into this than I have going into it, and we've all burned ourselves by getting down into a journey. We just had a plumbing deal fall through. We were all the way through an LOI and going through doing our due diligence, and we thought this was going to be a sweet deal and sweet opportunity. It was actually in Jupiter, Florida, and then we started doing the discovery work. And the owner started getting fidgety when we started asking for more facts and figures and access to bank accounts and tax returns, things like that. And so that's one thing that I encourage you. If you do, don't let your eyes outweigh on the buffet the true opportunity, and make sure that you do your due diligence. As I kept telling my partner in that opportunity, when you acquire a business, you own the business and you own all the liability that comes along with that business. So make sure that you do your due diligence and hold yourself accountable. And what held us up were there's some things that the owner wasn't forthright about, some loans and some obligations and some liabilities out there that we would have had to acquire. So that's when we decided to walk away.
What would you say, aside from, just financial due diligence and the criteria that you have, what would you say are some of the most important things for you to be thinking about and going through and navigating on the due diligence process if you are buying a business or if you're looking at buying one?
Especially in today's world, if you're dealing with companies like home services, things like that, online reputation is huge. And going on and doing an online reputation due diligence. There was another opportunity that we looked at for a HVAC company that everything smelled great, everything looked great, and then and their reviews were just horrendous. And the reviews actually specifically called the owner out by name, things like that. So that starts causing red flags for you to look at. And so it's really going in and doing your full due diligence and going on and searching. I'd encourage anybody that's serious in the M&A world, I'd encourage you to sign up for a Experian. Experian allows you to do a business credit searches. So it allows you to go in and search a business's credit history. So it's very similar, and it provides you with their conservative credit limit. It provides you with a score for that, very similar to a person's personal credit score. So investing in one of those programs, it's just a few $100 a month, really lets you go on and see the financials of a company based on Experian and what their background is, and it lets you see, if they're past due on their receivables, if they've got liens against them, things like that. So doing a reputation online, and then just taking a look at their monthly cash flow and expenses and liabilities. Are there big peaks and valleys? Something that you got to look at is if the owner is looking to exit, how much are they taking out of the business that you can put back into the valuation conversation? All of those kind of things that you need to look at and make sure that you do a full 360 due diligence.
That's good stuff. And I think on the note of talking about the HVAC deal, that's a perfect segue point to get into a little bit of deal analysis here. We've got an HVAC services company right here to look at. What's your initial read on this one, Bill?
Let me see. I pulled up the link here. So if we're going through here, so the asking price is 245. Your gross revenues, just under 500. Cash flows just under 100 grand. So some of the positives for me as I'm looking at that the owner's willing to finance, 10% over 60 months. I think that could be negotiated. Most definitely that can be negotiated. There's so many other different ways that you can finance a deal to really make up that gap between the owner financing and without spending money out of pocket. Some positives that I see here is that they've been around since 2003, so they've demonstrated stability and have an established customer base. Employee structure, I see they've got, I like that they've got 2 technicians. That's a little light for me. What I do get concerned about when you get under 10 employees that are there, that are W-2 employees and not just 1099s, is risk of departure if the owner departs. So that's something that you always want to shore yourself up at is with 2 technicians. If one person departs, half of your employee base has left the company. Looking at the business model, let's see, as I'm scrolling through here, looking at the business model, the 80% is residential, and 20% is commercial work. I see that as a positive, to where coming in and really focusing on building the commercial aspect of the business is an opportunity. So I like that. Going in, and one thing that does stick out as a positive is that the owner is really absent from the operation. So it runs daily without the involvement of the owner, which is a very attractive feature. That means that if the owner leaves the business today, the business keeps flowing with the structure that's in place. So there must be another operator in place who's really running the day-to-day. And then also, I love equipment. So it includes fully equipped vans, trailers, things like that. So I guess if you really break it down, some of the pros are the owner financing, established customer base of over 20 years, absentee owner model, and then that it services multiple regions and things like that. Some of the cons are license dependency. If the buyer doesn't, if the buyer's leaving and they're the ones that hold the HVAC license, that could limit the company. So really understanding who holds the license, who's going to have a license in place. Anytime that you're acquiring a home services business, it's important to understand the licensing structure, and that varies from state to state. So so that's something that to really take into account. Who controls and owns, is in control of the license? Is the owner willing to? If the owner controls the license, are they willing to have an option for the licensing for the next 2 years or 3 years until you bring someone on board that has the licensing? And then another con is just that there are only 2 technicians, so you've got a risk there. You need to really make sure that that you shore up the staffing and create a plan to make sure that those 2 don't depart. And if one of them does, what do you do with that? I see that there's a lot of growth opportunity. A company that's at 80-20 with residential, there's so much opportunity in, especially if this is, if you're looking at Florida market with construction, with commercial construction, there's so much opportunity to leverage that and start getting more into the commercial side and getting some of the larger contracts and things like that to grow and build the business on. So, I think that, the asking price is about 2.5 times the cash flow, which is, pretty typical for a business that size. So this is definitely something that would be worth having a greater conversation on and going in and start doing a due diligence and having those kind of conversations.
So if you were interested in this business today and you wanted to explore this further, what would be your next couple moves here typically? Like, are you reaching right out to the seller? Do you try to get in contact with the broker first? Walk us through your process a little bit.
So one, I'm never a proponent of brokers. I always prefer, I equate a broker to a real estate agent, and apologize for anybody that thought that a real estate agents, but in today's world of Zillow and Realtor.com and things like that, the purpose of a real estate agent is to set an appointment. So their value is less and less with today's online world. Same thing with brokers. And so I would definitely try to reach out to the seller directly and establish a conversation with them. And I would just approach it as that I'm part of an investor group, and we're focused on, and we've got background in the home services space. We understand the opportunity, would love to have an exploratory conversation just to learn more about the business, just to learn your motivation for selling, and to see if there's a potential fit to have a greater conversation. I wouldn't go into it heavy-handed. I would make sure that they understand that you're doing just an initial due diligence. Some of the things that I also look for, if I ever do go to like biz, buy, sell, things like that, I very seldom ever go after a company that's showing a new listing. If it's showing new listing, then that means that the owner's thinking that they're actually worth the valuation that they're asking for, and sort of like going after a house that's been on the market for 90 days or 190 days. You're going to have a lot more leverage behind it than going after a house that just hit the market last week. So it's the same type of concept. When I'm looking through this, I'm always looking for ones that have been sitting there that have been simmering for a while, that you've actually got an opportunity to go in, that they're more willing to have a negotiation conversation instead of, here's my asking price, this is what I'm going to do. Because then the next step, sort of how the journey works for me, and I've got a flow that goes through. That step one, and it's really a 3 meeting or a 3 engagement flow. Step one is just to have an initial conversation. Understand sort of that list of 30 questions. Not even want to get into heavy of your P&L and your income statement or any of that kind of stuff. Just have a conversation and get an idea. Is this a possibility of a deal? Is there generating any red flags? Understanding, are there other partners? Do they have liens out? Do they have loans out? Things like that. So go and work it through the list of 30 questions of it. And then after you do that, and then you decide and then you're getting through and you're going through, and then you get the financials. And you start looking at the what their income is, what their profit is, which will help you, enable you to put together either a valuation based off of SDE if it's under $1 million, or EBITDA if it's over $1 million. And then I always will meet with the seller next to walk through, understand your evaluation. Let me walk you through industry standard for the valuation for your type of company. And really help, and Mr. Seller, regardless whether you decide to sell the business or not, this is a good education for you to really understand valuation. I'm not sure what your broker told you in that, but this is sort of based off of industry standards. I know you're asking for a 4x multiplier, but really based off of where you're at a 700 SDE, 750 SDE. You're in the home services space, HVAC home services space. So really, you're looking at more of a 2.5 to 3x multiplier, and really walk them through, this is your high, this is your low. Get them to agree on that. Then you're having that kind of conversation. Then I also say, based off of our last conversation, I see that if we can agree on a valuation estimate, then based off your last conversation, I believe that these are the top 4 growth opportunities for the company. That where you're struggling for growth now. I've done research. I've done some research on your competitors in the area. You have a very low social media presence. Huge opportunity for a company that's been around for 20 years. We can really look at boosting you and utilizing your customer base to up your social media presence. So that's one way. We can look at getting you to focus in the commercial space. That's another way. So on and so forth. So they're starting to see the credibility. Half of the equation at getting someone to sell their business for no money out of pocket is them having confidence that you're a credible investor. and that you're able to bring them more than what they're originally asking for. So you go through and you have that conversation. You talk about what your discovery of researching them online, things like that is. And then you finish that conversation. And then you go into the next conversation, a third conversation of really letting them soak that in. And then you walk through and you put together a potential deal stack. And you put a potential deal stack of, I know you were asking for a seller financing of 10%, but if you're willing to do a 30% seller financing, I'm willing to do a 6% interest rate on that over 7 months. You've got a $300,000 line of credit. I'm going to take $150,000 of that line of credit and put that towards in funding the deal also. And then I'll do a revenue-based funding for this. And then I'll also give you 30% equity in the company. You put together your deal stack and present that to them. And then you go through and really walk them through based off of the valuation conversation that we had previously, based on that you're not needing cash in your pocket right now. Originally you're asking for $245,000. What if I can tell you over the next 5 years, I could get that to $500,000 based off of doing this, this, and this. Isn't that worth you sort of sticking in this for the long run versus the short run? And so that's sort of how I would approach the conversation with something like this, if that makes sense.
That was awesome stuff. Absolute gems there. I think
I to go to school. Bill just taught me what I want to know.
Ryan, what about you? What do you think of this business?
I think I probably should have done this instead of taking student loans. I agree with Bill on everything. I mean, these are all the points when I was looking at that I was wondering about. I mean, thankfully, it seemed like the seller was very active. It seemed like, having some connections in the space and having family who has run HVAC companies before, I was confident that I could get an operator in there if the operator wasn't sticking around. And knowing some people who work in the area, I was also, thinking, okay, these guys could literally just walk if this owner doesn't do it, if he doesn't do the best job of, not to say he wouldn't, but an owner can be the greatest liaison in the world between me, my operator, and these guys. And if they're just like, I don't like the way his teeth look, they can just walk. So I was confident that in the worst case, I'd at least be able to find another technician within 2 to 3 months, based on the people I know who are local in the industry. But, like he said, it would be a matter of a lot of that, a lot of those residentials being serviced and keeping people happy. And, a lot of these businesses that we have found don't have websites. So immediately jumping in there, finalizing the processes, and seeing, like you said, how he's already offering the seller financing, really trying to get him to stick it out and maybe give a bit of a better deal for a long-term gain overall, and keeping him on as some sort of like consulting presence essentially. But the deal stack is something that I'm still working on, because I think sometimes I say I work with an investing group and they look at me and they think you're 12, shut up. So really kind of that confidence in going into these deals with the more of the credibility, that's really what I'm working on with these, because more or less I'm always like, okay, SBA, do this, do that. Okay, who can I go for lending for? But I thought Bill nailed it on the head and put up some points that I don't think we normally don't explore as deeply. So that was great.
I really like especially the way you walk through the reasoning for considering any kind of seller financing or even increased seller financing. And especially for someone who might be in the position of, what you talked about earlier, where they're just burnt out on the business, or they've got 1 foot in, 1 foot out. They don't really love being alone in running it anymore. I think that's a really good fit, because maybe they don't want to completely give it up and they just thought selling outright completely was the only option. But when you have the legitimate alleviation to the pain that they're experiencing in the business, it can be a really major way to put them in a situation that's much better for them.
Yep. That's the key is early out of the gate, understand what their motivation for selling is, and you utilize that motivation as a negotiating point to really work through the deal.
So we've got another business to look at here. I will say right off the bat, we don't have cash flow on this one to look at. They are stating EBITDA though. So What do you think about that right off? What do you guys think about that right off the bat? Do you guys see that as a red?
About that one, they're either lazy and they didn't put it, or there's something that they're wanting to not be forthright about. So it's definitely a, when I look at this, I go through and I actually score things, and I either score it, either a 1, a 0, or a negative. A 1 if it's a positive, a 0 if it's sort of neutral, and a negative if there's, so definitely, if this is let's see, portable storage. So one, they don't have inventory. They're not listing inventory there. That there's inventory because there's storage units, things like that. So, and then 2, that they don't have the cash flow.
So lots of red flags right off the bat that, when you're looking at a lot of deals, which you have to as an investor, you've got to be looking at all kinds of deals. You've got to be really exploring all across the listings that you see, and even off-market deals, before you find the right one for you. When you see something that has this many red flags right away, Bill, do you typically just move on to the next? Is this something that you would still continue looking at? Or when you see red flags like that, is that something that usually deters you from the opportunity?
Well, it's really going through and doing a scoring model of going through and like I said, things are either a 1, a 0, or a -1. And as you're going through and scoring, you go through and you look at this just as I'm scrolling down. Other red flags, $24,000 in rent, and that's a significant fixed cost that impacts cash flow. That's high. There's limited cash flow visibility, as we had talked about. Storage in general, things like with big franchise competitors like Pods and Pack Rats and things like that are 2 that I think of. It's a highly competitive market. So when you've got high fixed costs, those are red flags that may really even avoid me from reaching out to them. But I'm always inquisitive about storage. Everybody's looking for places to store their crap because we're a hoarder society that we live in now. So there's never a shortage of opportunities with storage units. That's why they're popping up everywhere. So it would be worth more of a due diligence call, but I wouldn't put much into tracking the owner down and stalking the owner and going through it. One, I'm never a big fan of franchises. When you get into franchise, you're always paying the man, and you're always obligated to someone else. And so I'm not a big fan of franchises in general.
One thing I'll add to that, because we're of like mind there, Ryan and I talk about this on the show fairly often, actually. This is a little bit of an exception, but we many times just avoid even analyzing franchise deals. But every once in a while, we'll look at one just to talk about it a little bit. Another major thing that we see all the time in franchises that I've had many conversations with people trying to sell about is that there are all kinds of, stipulations in the franchise agreements themselves that make it difficult to sell the business. So from the perspective of someone trying to buy it, there may be hurdles that the person listing the business for sale and trying to sell it hasn't even gotten through yet, where you could think you've got a deal on the table, and all of a sudden they find out that their franchise agreement actually makes it so that they have to give first right of refusal to the franchise to be able to buy the business before anyone else can. That's a situation that I've come across before, where the guy didn't really know what to do because he had a great buyer lined up that was a great strategic fit, and he couldn't even offer it to him before offering to the franchise. And when he did talk to the franchise, they wanted to lowball him on the offer for probably less than the other person was willing to pay. So just something to be very wary of when you're considering getting into a franchise or, buying an existing one, is that they have all kinds of rules. And like Bill said, you're beholden to someone else in that case. And if you're looking to be your own boss, you've still got someone that you've got to report to at the end of the day, in a certain sense. What about some of these assets, what would you be thinking when you're looking at these types of assets? I know you mentioned with the other business, that's something you're usually thinking about and considering. In this particular one, it looks like it's primarily the value of the business, the way they're stating it, is primarily tied up in the assets.
It's backed by the $1.5 million worth of the FF&E.
Yeah, that looks like the majority of the value. So typically, this business on its own without the assets wouldn't really be selling for even close to $1 million. Do you think that it's appropriately priced for what the assets are?
I have to go. I have to do some more research on it. I mean, you're talking. Let's see here. 380 storage containers. So it's really understanding, going in and under. I need to do some more research on just the portable storage container industry. I know that you can go out and buy a shipping container for a few $1,000s. So, I would really caution someone to do their due diligence on understanding, since the majority of the asking price is backed by the assets, to understand, the valuation of that. I'm not as familiar with this industry and what that is. I just know, just from experience, that shipping containers are not that expensive.
It sounded high to me as well, and maybe they have just a whole lot of them. But I think a good question to ask in this case, like a very simple question, if you were trying to do your due diligence here, could just be, could you tell me a little bit about how the equipment was appraised? How did you arrive at that value? And then you could kind of look for where there might be gaps in what you believe should be the appraisal method or anything like that. So we have one other business to look at here that I think is a really interesting one. This is a trade school for CDL and truck driving. A little bit of a unique one right here. Ryan and I, actually, a little bit of background, have looked into trade schools a little bit lightly, into trade schools, staffing and recruiting companies and things like that. Because, and I'm curious your thoughts on this as well, Bill, because you're looking in the home services space too. One thing that we've noticed is a common trend across all of these home services businesses is that they're really struggling on the labor side right now. So I think a huge opportunity for either someone who has experience in staffing or recruiting, whether that's directly in the ownership role or even just working in staffing or recruiting or HR, or someone who has experience with a trade school of some kind. I think a huge opportunity is controlling that labor problem and making it into a non-problem and one that allows you to scale.
No, I agree. I love that. And I love anything that's into the coaching, training, and staffing type of world, because there is such a shortage of it, and sort of why we went out for an acquisition of this bookkeeping training academy. Those are heavy sought after markets, as there's a continued labor shortage, and and just going through this as I'm reading through, it's pretty in depth. There's cash flow is definitely a positive, especially with this type of stuff that we don't have the full P&L, but this type of stuff tends to be a very high margin business. Because training is the asset, and the education piece, things like that, are the heavy asset of it. But to your point, there's a high demand for CDL drivers in general as we grow as an economy, and so there's a high demand of that. There's federal regulations, things like that really control that not anybody can just get behind the wheel of a semi truck and start doing it. I love that there's so much opportunity that the owner financing and support is willing to finance 15%. You could probably work that up to 30 to 40%. That the owner's willing to provide 2 years of training, which means that the owner's not looking to exit the business. So you can leverage that in putting together a potential deal stack really building that on how your background and what you could do to grow and build the company. So and things like that, and things like this, training programs in general are so easy to scale. And it's just putting in together the systems and processes in place to scale it. So those are some of the pros as I'm going through. As I read through, it is a pricey investment at where it's at. But this is definitely an opportunity, for you to go in. You can do revenue-based financing terms, owner equity left in the business, things like that, to work through an attractive deal stack for this.
When you say revenue-based financing, that's something that I think Ryan and I both remember reading in that book that we've all read, Roland Fraser's book. Could you go through that briefly and just explain how that might look in a deal and where you might have seen that before? Because I think that's something that I certainly wasn't familiar with before reading that book, and I thought was a really interesting concept.
Yeah, so revenue-based financing, it's basically an alternative financing method to where the acquirer, the investor, provides capital in the business in exchange for a percent of the company's ongoing gross revenue. So instead of a fixed monthly payment or equity to the ownership, the business repays as a portion of its revenue until a predetermined repayment amount, whether it's to this point, whether it's 1.7 million or what of that. So there's several different ways that you can do it. Basically, payments are tied directly to the company's revenue, so they'll fluctuate based on how well the business is doing. If there's a lot of opportunity in business, in months where the business has higher revenue, you're providing higher payments. So you really is taking a look at the type of business it is, and does it have a business that's got a steady flow of revenue, or does it have high and low seasons? Unlike traditional loan terms that have fixed payments, revenue base really allows the company to repay only on a percentage of the revenue. So it can really ease the cash flow pressure on the company, especially for businesses with, as I said earlier, with seasonal or fluctuating income. So it really just opens you up to more flexible terms. It opens you up to an opportunity with the seller, based on what the seller knows in the business and knows what the capability is in the business, to pull more out of the business over a percent of time and gain more of what their asking price is. There's a lot of pros and cons to it. I talked about, there's, no loss in ownership, unlike an equity financing. Revenue base doesn't dilute the ownership, allowing the founders to really retain full control. But there are some cons in it. Potentially, it's a higher cost. You're really depending upon the repayment multiple and the business's revenue growth. The interest rate can be high, sometimes exceeding a traditional loan or interest rate. It's really revenue dependent. So you've got to have a high confidence level in the revenue capability. And that's why it's important to go back and look at the past 3 years, 4 years worth of revenue to see if the revenue can support something like that. It's really best suited for businesses with a strong and predictable revenue stream. And so things like SaaS companies, e-commerce, training, something that has a high revenue margin, a high margin business is a reoccurring revenue. You sign up for a training class, you're paying $1,000 a month for 12 months. Things like that are advantageous to do revenue-based financing. Does that make sense?
That makes total sense. And I think it's great that you talked about it for this one in particular, because this one's a great example. It's doing just over $1 million a year in sales revenue, but cash flowing $713,000. So it's a very high margin business. And if you look into it, it's because there's only 2 employees. So it sounds like this business is mostly run through, maybe some kind of online platform or just systems that stay in place. Maybe those 2 employees are educators of some kind. I guess we could look into that a little bit more. But I think this is really interesting. And anything like this, that's in the that's in the education space around a growing industry is a really smart place to be.
No, and if you and Ryan aren't looking at this, then I'm going to look at this specific one. So I always like to look at things. If you scroll back down, another thing that always highlights to me, if retirement is the reason for exiting, there's a sense of urgency to put together an attractive deal stack because they're time bound, they're wanting to exit the business, things like that. But a deal stack that you can put together could become their 401k, so to speak, in paying them out over a period of time, so that they're not needing $600,000 today. Can you walk them through with seller financing and revenue by financing, things like that you can that they can make $700,000, $800,000 over 7 years, 8 years, 9 years, then it's an attractive opportunity. But retirees are very motivated sellers, but they're not motivated to bring in a large chunk of change today. They're just motivated to sell and exit the business.
And I think you hit on something really important there too, because if we break that down for a moment and think about it, they're motivated by the security of the money and how it pays out. Another thing that's I think is really important to consider there is, in a real way, if someone was to sell this business for the full almost 2.4 million that they're asking, that's going to be a really massive tax liability if they did get it all at once. And that's something you can walk them through as well, which is, if we spread this payment out over a number of years, not only is it helping you as the buyer to be able to more fluidly use the cash flow of the business to help pay for it and smooth that transition, but it's also helping the previous owner maximize the actual money that they see from that sale, because they're going to pay far less in taxes every year if they're just getting payments on a yearly basis.
Yep.
This is good stuff. So all in all, what was your favorite business that we looked at today, Bill?
This one, I'm always, I'm telling you, if you and Ryan don't go after this, I'm going to. But
we'll talk after the show, Bill. We'll talk after the show.
Yeah,
I'm always after mentoring, coaching, training type of companies. And this is a perfect example of what I was talking about earlier. They're high margin companies. So they're high margin companies that suffer from a great idea and need to have systems and processes in place to be able to scale. And every time, if you're on network TV after 10 o'clock at night, not an hour's gonna go by before you see a training school for CDL drivers, things like that. It's a sought after type of industry, and there's not a lot of assets tied to it. So it's really, putting together the systems and processes in place to be able to scale the business, and bringing in, an agency, depending upon how they're going to market in their business today. I would say this is the first one, and then definitely the HVAC one would be one worth having a conversation with, and then I would pass on the second one.
Okay, that's a pretty solid 1, 2, 3.
What about you, Ryan?
I think I would say for me, the HVAC, only because that's where like my resources are, and being so young in this M&A journey, I feel the most confident that I could get that one scaled and moving. Obviously the goal is to one day be similar to Bill and be looking at a trucking company, go, oh, I got the skills to turn this, and I got the network where I can make this work. So that's why that one's in second place. Now, granted, I'm assuming myself, like, if I would take any of these deals with someone like Bill. If he approached me about a trucking company, if he said, let's do it, I would do it. I think he's a resource. And I think that also leads back to the partnership thing. If partnering is a concept, I'd feel comfortable partnering with someone like Bill on a deal like the trucking, but on my own, probably the HVAC is going to be my sweet spot, followed by trucking. And then obviously not even going to touch the Miami thing. just Miami in general, I don't usually go to. So this would probably be a bad idea for me.
You have a whole other podcast of doing deals in Miami.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I think I'm going to echo Bill's ranking for the 3 deals and say I really like this trade school one as a number 1. The biggest thing that I want to add to the conversation we had before about specifically the trade school one here is if you're trying to make multiple acquisitions like Bill already has and create kind of a portfolio of businesses that are all running under your umbrella and potentially even helping each other grow, something like this, something coaching related, education related, is really smart in my opinion as a platform to open the door for that later down the road. Because if you, for example, if someone had experience in the trucking industry, they could acquire this business and then eventually acquire trucking businesses, and they would control the whole value chain of being able to educate people and staff up those trucking businesses that they owned now and grow them even more and potentially get a really big return on the investment of buying those trucking businesses. I think that's the case. Yep. And then start buying other related things, maybe a manufacturer of trucks or something. But I think it's really smart anytime to, like Bill was talking about, to hone in on the education and coaching space, even just because it's a great type of industry to scale. It's very easy to scale if you can get the systems and processes in place. But it also really paves the way and opens the door for future acquisitions if that's in your wheelhouse too.
Well, I think that about wraps it up for our deal section, but I want to make sure that before we go, I definitely want to hit Bill with one more question, because I feel like we've touched on it at different points, but we haven't really just kind of jumped on it. So obviously people who watch this are fairly new to the industry or just have kind of understood the industry, and me and Brody myself are young into our journey within this industry. When it comes to people who are watching going, well, I work a job, I don't know if I have the ability to, I don't know, like that shift between, being employed and being the employer essentially. What is that leap that you usually have to get people over to take that first step into this world?
The one, there's nothing that says that you have to walk away from your job today for you to be in the M&A space. So I worked at the M&A space for quite a while before I decided I was at the level of a corporate executive before I decided that I finally reached that inflection point that I'm not going to have to sell a house to be able to get in the M&A space and focus on you've got enough deals that you're working in the side, in the background. It does take a commitment when you're working a job to go do it, but I encourage you to get involved in a network and a community, an M&A community. I always, so that you're not going through the journey by yourself. If anything, there's tons of Epic Network is definitely one of them, and there's tons of communities out there that help support. And then my first few deals were all with partners, so that I can learn with people that are much more experienced than I am. And then finally, when you're able to, I have a goal of how do I replace, when I reach that point of being able to replace my 9 to 5, 8 to 5 income, then you could take the leap. But the majority of people in the M&A space are doing it while they're working their job and building it to it. And it takes a commitment. But if you join a network, if you join a community and you don't feel like you're going through it by yourself, and you partner with individuals that bring other assets to the table, I can't stress that enough. Partnering with people enables you to cast a wider net. It opens you up to so many more opportunities. Doing that helps you get to where you reach that inflection point to where you can sort of shed the corporate chain, so to speak, and focus on it full time. But there's nothing that says that you can't do both at the same time.
That's a really, I think we're gonna have to clip that one and do like a reel and a short and post that all over, because I think that's one of the most important pieces we've had on the show so far. Because I think everybody's kind of an all or nothing type deal when they look at it, and I feel like that's a very realistic, like, built from the ground up mentality of somebody who's been doing this at a big level for a while. And Brody's muted again.
Sorry about that, guys. And I was going to say, and I love that Bill went through that exact journey of, starting things off while he was working another job. He kept it going on the side, built this up to something that had that security where he'd seen, okay, this works. This is going to be my full-time thing. Now that it's off and launched, let's take that leap. And I think for anyone listening, I've talked to so many people that are in a similar position that want to create something like this for themselves. And you don't have to wait. You can go ahead and get it started and open up the road for yourself to take a smart, well thought through leap in that way.
Well, Bill, where can everybody find you and where can they consume either more content, or if they want to sell a business or they want to talk to you about business, where can they find you?
Sure. So one, you can go to my website, rogerscapinvest.com. So that's one way to reach out to me. There's a contact us. There's about everything on there about our journey. And Brody, if you've got the internet up, if you could go to that and show that, that'd be great. So someone could see that. It's just Rogers, ROGERS, capinvest.com. Or you can send me a email at bill@rogerscapinvest.com, or text me, or there we go. Or text me or email me. There's a lot of great content on it. We've got a blog that we do everything focused around the M&A space, consulting for equity. Also, I often forgot a part of the journey, the exit part of the journey. So we have a blog that we talk about, the exit journey as well. So, definitely going here, and my phone number is up there also, 512-963-3462. If you just want to reach out and have a conversation and learn more or things like that, don't hesitate. I love having conversations, and if anything, building a friendship and a partnership is always what my number one goal is.
Awesome stuff.
That's great.
Bill, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge today. This has been really, really impactful stuff. What's been your number one takeaway from thinking through some of this stuff?
Oh, that it is that when you're going in and looking for opportunities, to go in and take a full 360-degree view. And I encourage you, use a scoring system. Number one rule is, before you really get heavy in the M&A journey, have an acquisition criteria so that you're not in that kid in the candy store space. So where you're going after deals that, your appetite is bigger, your eyes are bigger than your appetite is, and you're trying to consume something that you're going to waste calories and energy on, that's going to end up falling through. Get a few small acquisitions under your space to start providing that cushion that then you can grow and build on. That's one. Two, as I talk about, it's always easier to go on a journey with a partner than it is by yourself, and to find a network. But, perfect example, Brody and Ryan are great resources in what they're looking at building. They're looking at building a special community and a special group of people that are really focused on there. So, I thank you both for the opportunity to come in and just learn from the two of you, as well as you're on your journey.
And thank you.
Coming from you, Bill. Thank you.
And for anyone who's been tuning in, listening, watching, I really encourage you to reach out and get in touch with Bill, because like he said, he can partner on deals and prefers to partner on deals. So if you find yourself in a situation where maybe you want to take that leap and you're looking for some kind of deal to do, there are people out there like Bill that have this experience that maybe someone newer to the game doesn't have. Whether you have industry specific experience, but you don't feel as competent in the sales or the operations or the marketing, there are really, really strong and competent people like Bill out there that have that ability and have that desire to grow with partners. So find him, talk to him, figure out what type of industry is right for you. And if you can find someone like him that aligns with what you're trying to do, you might just find yourself a lot more comfortable with taking that leap.
Appreciate it.
A fantastic episode.
Awesome. Well, Bill, thanks again. Actually, we've got one question that I saw came in. I'll answer this briefly to the best of my ability. This is a little bit of a tough one. Someone asked, how would this model change when dealing with a deceased author? And I can only guess that you're probably talking about how would you buy a business that has to do with a deceased author. I think you would, nothing about what we're talking about would change aside from one thing, which is you would have to figure out who has the rights to any of that business. You would have to figure out, and my guess would be that in most cases it's going to be the family or someone close to them. But I think you would be dealing with the estate itself if you were working on a business that had to do with a deceased author.
No, agree. Oh, go ahead.
No, go
No, I
ahead.
agree, and you know, not to sound cold, but it's when you're dealing in those type of environments, you have a motivated seller because they're looking at exiting. Now, it may be a challenge because just like when they're selling other things that are in a state, your ability to do it for no money out of pocket and putting together a deal stack may be more limited. But if that's not a challenge for you, and you're willing to put some equity into it, and some capital into it, then you can get a good deal because just as it's an estate they're looking at liquidating and exiting. So it's a good opportunity for you to get something for a value.
And to cap that off, I would say Bill is totally right. You're very likely dealing with someone who is a motivated seller in the sense that they might have ended up being the one with the rights to this business that they either have no desire to run or don't feel competent to run or just don't want to run. And so you might be doing them a favor by figuring out some kind of deal where they could benefit from the transition rather than just closing it down. So definitely something to consider there. Altogether, I think it could be an opportunity worth considering, especially if you have some connection to either that author or whoever has the rights at that point. Well, guys, this has been fantastic. Again, I'll reiterate, if you are looking to find Bill, find him on his website here, rogerscapinvest.com. I know you're also on LinkedIn as well, Bill, so find him there as well. If you're looking to find myself or Ryan, you can find me on about any channel, on YouTube, LinkedIn, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, all that stuff. Ryan is a LinkedIn guy like Bill. Find Ryan on LinkedIn and tune in every week at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for Deal Flow Live, and we will be reviewing all kinds of deals. So submit your questions, submit the industries you'd like to see us cover, and let us know if you'd like to come on and do an analysis like Bill has today. All right. And I will see everyone next time.
See ya.